Well, welcome everybody. You want to get started, Fred? Should we do
Yeah,
this?
let's do, shall we? Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome. And Martin kind of alluded to it, but there's a little bit, you know, the focus of our series is. Are you seeing that slide there, Fred?
Yeah, Thursday conversation series. Yeah.
Yeah. Is get my subtitles out because you all probably don't speak Chinese. Is we were going to follow the kind of all the stuff going on. Our focus and theme for this spring series is to really look at our American democracy. And there's all kinds of things going on that we talked about when I spoke last about that. And I highlighted this week, though, one that is part of that we talked about in how do we bolster and really look after the health and of our democracy and help create a better, perfect union in our country. But criminal justice reform obviously is front and center today, and especially this week. So we wanted to kind of really start tonight. We're going to deviate a little bit from what we had planned on, talking about empowerment and whatnot. And just it still pertains, and really looking at the events of this week do align with awakening, a civic awakening, and a concern that we need to become more active and really look at, what can we do to improve criminal justice, racial justice in this country. And this is really a reckoning, what we saw this week. And I speak from, I've been in the criminal justice system and studying and practicing in the administration of justice since 1979, and actually a little before that. And I think it's slow. It's a big ship. It moves slowly. It's hard to steer it and turn it around or make adjustments, but it's happening. It is happening. And the verdict this week, I think, is very, very indicative of that. You see this, and then we saw this. That's justice. And that's coming from a practitioner, but that is justice. That's a reckoning too. It's a sign that, as you may have heard, the blue wall is kind of starting to ease up, and the culture of policing is changing. It's changing. And by and large, you hear it, there's just a few apples and whatnot, but policing's got a problem. Policing in America is out of touch. They're out of step with a lot of the communities that they are serving. And some believe that they are the ones that should design that. And that's a mistake. So I want to start there with that graphic. And Fred, I'm going to give it to you. You there? He's gone. Did I lose him? There you are.
Can I say something about, he's back.
Yes, I'm back. Yes.
Fred is back, and Bobby, you're up next. But Fred, I just wanted to turn it over to you at this point, and I think this is where we're going to spend our focus, and we'll see where it goes. And if we get to the regular scheduled agenda, we'll do that. But I don't think we can leave this quite yet. It really is part of what our work is anyway, because the criminal justice system in America is part of our democracy, and it's a pivotal part of our democracy and our freedom, and we have to get it right. And we have opportunities that have opened up and have softened up because of the events this week, tragically, that led a year ago, May 25th, it started. But that's historic. And sure, if the 17-year-old girl and others had not videotaped it, would we have seen what we saw this week? Good chance we wouldn't have. But the fact that we did, and people know that. People know that. So let's move down that road. And before we're over with tonight, we'll look at some of the things we can do locally, because policing is local. But I'll get more on that. Fred?
Thank you, Greg. I don't know anything that has been more watched than the verdict this week. And I was reading the Salem newspaper this morning, and there's a candidate for the school board who responded to Oregon State University's placement of a picture of George Floyd on their webpage with his birth and death years. and she responded negatively and said she was her alma mater was embarrassing her and so on. And that was quickly taken down after it was put up. But there are people certainly on both sides of the question that have thoughts about it. But I think, you know, as we look at the Black community, as I watched a funeral today for another person who was killed by the police, they were talking about this may be a change. This may be something that will maybe bring something that we've all been hoping for. And so, you know, that I think is yet to see, but it is something that yeah, it's not going to go away in just a matter of days. Last night, I was struck when I was watching news in the state of Florida. The governor there, Governor DeSantis, who has is one of the potential candidates for president in 2024. Apparently, he's been leading a movement that is gaining ground at least in Florida, and well, certainly Florida, Oklahoma, Iowa, and some other states, including Indiana and some others, that would allow when there's a demonstration in the streets, if a car hits a demonstrator, then that motorist would not be legally responsible. And it wouldn't be a crime. And then in the state of Florida, they're changing with new laws, they're changing their definition of riots to any group of people with 3 people in the demonstration. And if you followed the Chauvin trial, you know that there were quite a few references to the intimidation of the crowd that was standing there by the delicatessen while the police were doing their thing with George Floyd. One of the members of that crowd was the little girl, the 9-year-old girl, who was one of the witnesses at the trial, and there were other ferocious-looking people like this little girl. So again, it was a crowd, just a small group of people. It looked like maybe 20 folks that were there, and they weren't violent. They were saying, you know, he can't breathe. He's going, you know, and trying to come to his rescue. And so definitions are important. And then I wrote a thing on Facebook. And Greg, why don't you read that? Would you? I can't get to it because I'm.
Stand by. I was just looking at Martin's deal. Hang on, let me get back to it. All right, this is what you wrote on Facebook. Quote, let me get this straight. Republicans in Florida, Oklahoma, Indiana, and other states are passing laws to protect motorists who hit demonstrators while marching in the streets and adding other restrictions on peaceful demonstrations. In Florida, 3 people constitute a riot. Also, there are new laws to protect Confederate relics. Really? In addition, suppress the vote and at all costs keep people from voting. This is really sounding like know your place, and yet this is a democracy? End quote.
So my feeling as I listened to this was that, you know, here we've had this voter intimidation going on, and, you know, questions about giving food to people waiting in line to vote. And so that's on one hand. And now we have a definition over here for what, how many people constitute a riot. And then we have questions about cars hitting people who are demonstrating in the streets. Now, in no case are we talking about people who are breaking windows and all that sort of thing. But there is something going on in this country, and you know, if you just kind of follow along with it, you see there's a pretty good pattern here. And it certainly, it shows some of the things that we are trying to discuss and have been discussing in this group since September. And so that's something I think that we cannot ignore as we come into this group tonight. And I think it would be good for us to have a conversation about a number of these things that I've mentioned, and anything that you else along this line that where you can see what we've done since we started and where we are today. So I think what Greg and I would like to do, and one thing I want to call your attention to also, this is an Associated Press comment from February the 8th. And it says only a fragment of Americans believe democracy is thriving in the United States. Even broad majorities agree that representative government is one of the country's bedrock principles, according to a new poll from the Associated Press. Just 16% of Americans say democracy is working well or extremely well. Pessimism that spans the political spectrum. Nearly half of Americans, 45%, think democracy isn't functioning properly, while another 38% say it's working only somewhat well. Core elements of democratic government, including free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power, were put to a dire test by the baseless claims of election fraud, which we heard about from November 3rd on. So there's some fodder to talk about. That's Uncle Sam in the middle of the room right now. And so I think we'd be interested in what you think. And we're not going to break into small groups tonight. We're going to stay together, and we've got a number of things that we'd like to talk about. So who would like to lead off with a comment? I think Bobby, you wanted to speak.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Hey, I was wanting to talk about the rotten apple metaphor.
Yes.
And I think bad apple. There we go.
Yeah.
Bad apple. And I think this week is the first time we've actually seen the metaphor appropriately, because we have used this phrase for years. It's just a bad apple. But the whole concept of the metaphor is you identify the apple that is bad and you remove it, or it continues to fester the whole group of apples. And what we've had, even though we've said bad apples, we've left the bad apples in, or we've transferred them to fresh apples and then they keep doing their thing. And so I think this week, even though the pendulum may push back, and often will do that, I still think it's an actual time where we saw the metaphor being used correctly. A bad apple is to be removed, to be clearly identified and removed. And I think that we need to just keep doing that and doing that and doing that. And I think one of the most powerful things for me is that good cops came out and said, this is not the way it should be, and didn't just be silent. Right. And so I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Bobby. Somebody else? Comments? Is there anyone else?
Caprice has raised.
Caprice?
Hi. Yeah, on that same note about, I think good cops don't want bad cops around. And I saw something, or I heard something where someone said, if you're in a law enforcement position and what happened this week makes you feel like you want to resign, do it. because we don't need you around if this is what upsets you.
Very good. I like that. I
Thank
like
you.
that too. Yeah, and today, I teach criminal justice. There is no better time to be. I should have opened tonight with, you know what, y'all? There's no better time to be in the profession of law enforcement than there is today.
Let me offer a word from Isaiah,
Who's that?
which
Who's me?
Yeah, I can't.
That's
I can hear. I see Jen. Hang on, Jen. I hear
Jen?
some voice though. I don't know. Somebody was sorry if we didn't catch you, but Jen, go ahead. And if the male voice, I'm not sure who that was, Robert, who? Jen, go ahead. You're off. You're
Thanks.
on mic.
It was interesting because I'm in another discussion group, anti-racism discussion group, and we met just fortuitously on Tuesday night. And we meet only every 6 weeks right now. And that was nice to be able to process things right away. I was really glad that we were meeting, of course, tonight. But I wanted to share some perspective from the police side of things, which is really hard for me and created some angst between some friends and I. I have a friend whose son is in law enforcement. And when I have posted things on Facebook around Black Lives Matter, anti-racism materials that I wanted to share, videos, books, etc., I got such an angry response from this father of a policeman. And he just could not see any other side than, you don't understand. You don't understand what it's like to be a cop and to be in danger and to not know if your son's going to be able to come home. And so I think that there's just such a huge mental divide. But and how many Blue Lives Matter flags have we seen go up since Black Lives Matter protests last year? It's like this either or thing, and I don't know how we get past that. It's so sad. And I told him, I said, I appreciate your son's service. I respect law enforcement. And I don't think this is an either or thing. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean blue lives don't matter. So it's a big divide.
Yeah.
And it's a black or white thing. David is.
David has something to say. Thanks, Jen. Well
Thank you,
said.
Jen.
David, you're on mute.
There we go. In regard to that, I think it's really important that what happens next in terms of the other three that have followed, the Dante Wright, and then the 13-year-old boy, and then the 16-year-old girl. And you had body cams. And to your thing, Jen, is that you really did see, and you get right on real time with that 13-year-old kid running with the gun, drops the gun behind the fence, turns and raises his hands and gets shot. I mean, it was a split-second thing. And so you're kind of going, okay, what would I have done? And then the 13-year-old girl or 16-year-old girl had the knife. And of course, they've got to get different videos, find out the whole context of it. They keep saying, could he tase her? Well, how far away was he? He was too far away. She had that knife ready to me, it looked like she had the knife ready to stab the girl. I mean, it was just like that. But yet Dante Wright, they provoked the situation. I felt the cops provoked it like they did George Floyd, trying to pull him out of the car and we're going to tase you and knock it off and see. And so I think this was a good week to see all these. And I'm hoping that we can not just put them all in the same bucket, and begin to see the nuance of policing, because there was a good, and Greg, you would probably know that. I mean, it was a good clinic on what they do go through.
Yeah, very well said, David. And those are different buckets. And some of those, in my opinion, are probably justified use of force, because you can't wait. It's sad and unfortunate,
right,
for everybody involved, but yeah. And the Floyd case was just such a gross, deal. Robert.
We're leading with a gun though. if he would have stepped out of the car with a taser and ran over and shot her. But and why did he have to shoot her 4 times?
Which one are you talking about?
Well,
The knife?
you know, somebody's handling something with the 17-year-old that got shot 4 times for almost stabbing someone.
Yeah.
And the problem partly with her is that she called the police on herself, or
Yeah.
she called the police on the girls that were outside that had followed her home. And she called the police, and when the police came, they shot her because she was whatever she was doing. And why was the police coming out of the car with gun in hand and not taser in hand? What I'm saying is maybe the death rate would be lower if a gun wasn't the hammer that they used all the time. When they, for George Floyd, they had a gun on him to get him out of the car in the first place. So they're leading with a gun all the time. What's this mindset of
Right.
gun for a misdemeanor?
Right.
I'll leave for.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering also, whatever happened to the idea of like the girl with the knife in her hand, and whatever happened to the idea of shooting their hand if you have,
Can't do that.
or a leg or something like that, rather than go for something that's fatal.
Well, they're trained, the firearm is to be used only if you intend to use deadly force, because you don't shoot at cars and you don't try to wing somebody. I mean, the current practice and policy is that it's deadly force, and there's a scale of force that you escalate up to. And a knife generally is deemed, depending on distance and all that, as a deadly weapon. So especially if she was trying to stab somebody else, he's using deadly force to prevent serious physical injury or harm or death of another person is probably what's going to come down on that.
But he was running toward the incident with a gun in hand for deadly force first thing.
Right. Well, you wouldn't use taser on somebody with a knife normally. You wouldn't. Because it's
why
a
not?
deadly weapon. It's a deadly weapon. A knife is a knife.
But they say a taser you can shock yourself with a 12-volt battery and you can die. You ask any electrician.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also a deadly weapon, but
well, taser
not necessarily.
It's not supposed to be a deadly weapon.
But 4 times.
Also, Greg, on that, what about, I understand there's another one where the guy's driving away and they shot at the car.
Yeah.
That's what they shouldn't have done. You just said they're not supposed to do that. That's the latest one.
The problem with shooting at a car is if you are successful, which most of the time you're not, but if you're successful and you actually incapacitate the driver and the car is moving, you just launched a missile that's unarmed or unaimed. You know, it's going to go somewhere. Martin.
I think the 2 latest episodes, I think we really don't know enough to make definitive judgments. I think, there's investigations that need to be done. With the Floyd case, there's probably more information available than there has ever been for a situation like that. And what I wonder, and it's kind of a question for you, Greg, I can't see into Chauvin's heart or soul, but my guesses aren't very flattering. What really troubles me and has me wondering is the behavior of the other law enforcement personnel on site during that slow motion murder. The park police guy who's holding back the crowd. The other, the initial officers that tried to make the arrest. Is there, I mean, I know I've heard, my police cousin talk about, command voice and never wanting to back down. But, the people in the crowd were giving those police good advice. They were saying you're moving, but there was something in the interpersonal dynamics, the way the police are trained, inability to admit, to cede authority to anybody else, where they where nobody was willing to try to de-escalate over a protracted period of time.
Right.
What do you think's going on there, and how does training
Yeah.
address that kind of thing?
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. I'll answer your question by going back what Bobby said in the bad apple. And the bad apple can fester if it's not taken care of and cause other problems, right? And in this case, we got rid of the bad apple. But if you noticed, the very next day, the United States Department of Justice, our new Attorney General, launched a patterns and practices investigation. That's a civil investigation. It's going to take a very, very hard, exhaustive look at that police department. And they're going to look at the culture. They're going to look at the training. They're going to look at the hiring processes. They're going to look at their use of force policies. And they're going to make determinations on whether or not they have a pattern and or practice of policing that is unconstitutional, that violates civil rights, or is some other way inadequate, such as like in Ferguson, Missouri. In that case, they saw many things that were a problematic pattern and practice, to include the fact that the police department was doing all their traffic enforcement, writing tickets and whatnot to generate revenue through the municipal court. And then that funds the city. So the city pressures the chief and says, we need this revenue source. It's a great source. Who are they citing most of the time? It was people of color. And then who don't show up for court. So then it just, and so that's going to be good. That's good news. And that's in addition to the civil rights criminal investigation that was launched alongside the state criminal charges. I imagine they're going to find, maybe, pretty good chance they'll find some federal crime there. So Chauvin is probably not going to see the light of day for some time.
Probably not.
Greg, there's another thing too, that on the Minneapolis Police Department, their police chief is fairly new and quite new, and he's Black, and the city where he was previously, he raised concerns about discrimination in that police department. So he'll be at the helm as this investigation gets underway with the feds.
That's good. If you just look at, and kind of back to, I love Bobby's metaphor as far as the bad apple and just, the problems with it. My guess is that you look at that case and you see problems from the very beginning. And I mentioned this last time I spoke on this, is the fact that where was the investigation of probable cause that Mr. Floyd had knowingly passed a forged instrument, right? There, as far as I can tell, it came up in the trial a little bit, there never was one. And then to greet a citizen at gunpoint, why do you do that in broad daylight? What is your fear that you thought you might need to use deadly physical force? Because a gun, again, is intended to be used for deadly physical force. Where is the evidence that would cause an officer to greet a suspect on a forgery, which may or may not be intentional or knowing, with a gun in his face? I mean, that just begs questions about racism, about bias,
right,
about a culture within that police department that in certain neighborhoods, they over-police and they are thugs. And then the way they arrested him, they immediately put him in handcuffs. Why did they do that? Oh, he's big. A lot of people are big. He's big. It goes back to that image of the scary Black man that we've been dealing with for decades. It's the scary Black man who will hurt you if you let them. So you've got to at all costs disable him, And the more we've learned about Mr. Floyd, he was a gentle giant.
Yeah.
He had drug addiction problems. He had a criminal history. He's a human. He's part of our humankind who happens to have dark skin. So there's all kinds of things that you can see. I think they're going to see in this pattern and practice investigation that the apple cart is rotted. Mm-hmm. And the new chief hopefully survives that if he's good, and they can start really retooling this organization. And remember that policing is local. We've got a federal bill, which is good. The George Floyd federal legislation that's made it, I think, halfway through. Got some pretty good things in there. Oh, it's political, but it's only going to go so far because you can only do so much at the federal level to really influence the local community police. And that's where it all happens, right? So if you personally feel, and this is in line with our discussions, wanted to take steps to take action on this item of police reform, start local, think local. And it starts with, what does the community want their policing to be? And the police don't lead that. The unions don't lead that. It's the people you elect into city council, the county commission, that lead that. And it actually comes from the citizens. If the citizens of color were to start protesting and say, I want professional policing, I want a guardian model of policing, not a warrior model of policing in this town. And I don't want traffic enforcement to be related to revenue generation. That's corruption. And it's like traffic enforcement's not based on trying to prevent crashes. It's about generating money. And so it starts local. And I have a slide that I'll show before we end on what your local legislature is doing. And it's some pretty good stuff. But it even starts lower than that. Like if you're in the city of Salem, you got a brand new chief who seems to be pretty progressive. I got him on a board now. Start there and start with the city council. Like we had Jose, as part of it. He's the kind of people you need to talk to and say, this is, we're tired of this. We're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior by our police department anymore. And so, and I get that, but I'm tired of hearing it, to be honest with you. And I served in this for 29 years and longer than that studying it. I'm tired of hearing it. Well, it's just a bad apple. There's too much of this going on today. And what
Greg, I think Neil's had his hand up about 10 minutes.
Okay, Neil, go ahead.
Well, listen to all this second quarter quarterbacking or fifth quarterbacking about all of what's wrong. I think we've probably done it to ourselves over a long period of time because we've expected the police department to do everything, to deal with people that are suicidal, to deal with people that are carrying an AR-15 in a parking lot shooting people, or dealing with traffic enforcement for people that are driving 80 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone. So they had one image fits everything, and I think that's where the reform comes in, because they need to do traffic stops for people that are dealing with traffic stops. They need to do, the policemen are specialized to do SWAT teams. And so that's where the reform comes in, that it is not one size fits all. Every policeman can do everything there is to do.
Good,
Thank you, Neil. I want to mention
point.
something. I want to mention something here. When I was in the legislature, Governor Straub asked me to chair a commission on community corrections because his feeling was that we had decided that everybody that did anything that violated the law should be incarcerated or get a good jolt, and that he wasn't convinced that we shouldn't bring social services into it and all of that. So one of the things that I think we watched as with this trial and the verdict and everything is in the state of Minnesota, and now with this federal investigation will be going on. That's exactly where we turned when we were starting to look at community corrections. Minnesota had one of the best programs in the country. And I went back there and spent quite a while going from community corrections program to the next, and came back with a lot of information. And we were able to put our program together, which has worked very well in Oregon. And so Minnesota isn't some backwards or backwoods state that has completely missed the boat. They've done some progressive things, and I think that should be remembered also. But also on the same tour, I was in Stillwater, which is one of the more notorious prisons in the country. And I was at liberty to walk around and talk to whoever I wanted to talk to. And there was this one 14-year-old kid that I was visiting with, who was in prison for a number of years because he'd been caught with an ounce of marijuana. And I didn't tell him in Oregon we had just changed the laws on marijuana and made the same possession for the same amount a $20 violation of the law. And so, you know, it is ongoing. It is. And but I think we need to, you know, we need to keep all that in mind too.
Can I ask Greg, what they mentioned it today, showed some video of Biden, you know, what's the 1994 crime bill that why did they feel the need to have to fund 100,000 more police, more prisons, more everything in 1994? It seems like we're trying to backtrack from that legislation of 1994. You hear that over and over again.
Right. A lot of what you hear is in political arguments and whatnot, you know, but the crime bill was because if you look at the 70s and the 80s, historically in this country, both property and violent crime rates were just climbing and climbing and climbing. And the crime bill was intended to really get after that. So we did a lot of different things at the federal level and at the state level. You had, and it was not a due process model. It was a crime control policy model that we implemented back in the 90s. And that was part of it. It's tough on crime. 3 strikes, you're out. We got to get after this crack cocaine and, you know, all this. We didn't realize at the time that, especially with the crack cocaine laws, had minimum mandatory sentences at the federal level, which I was involved in street gang operations in Portland, where we put lots of people of color away for a long time because of crack cocaine. That particular legislation really targeted Black people, not intentionally, but it had the effect of really who used crack cocaine then? People of color. And they had harsh sentences where you had probably many, many more people, white people that use prescription drugs illegally, and, you know, no big deal. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's,
well, it was trying to solve, I figured it had to solve a
down.
problem. It was trying to solve a problem.
Yeah, it was to solve the problem, to go after high crime and violent crime. And then you had, you know, in the Clinton years, you had cops grants, and that's where you hired, you know, thousands of police officers, a lot of federal money to hire additional police and to provide military equipment for them, because, you know, the war on drugs, you know, and so that's a product of what you're seeing. The crime rates went down. If you talk to any good criminologist, you know, what caused the crime rate to go down? Was it the street strikes, the federal policies, all that? It actually probably was the policing tactics. They became more oriented to community policing. That's probably the only change you really saw. So it's been a good thing. Robert.
I've read the opposite in books lately. It said that was more of a racist thing. They had gone after Black people, and there was just as many white people using crack cocaine, but they didn't go after the white people. They just went after the Black people. And why are they going after the users? Why aren't they going after the sellers?
Right. Actually, they did both, actually, but it was really targeted people of color for sure. That's how we ended up with, I don't know if you all know how many, in America, we have more people in prison than any other country in the world, right? We have 2.2 million people, plus or minus a few, in prisons. And majority of those, you know, over a representation of color.
This supposedly, I understand, started with Reagan, where he did the war on drugs.
Nixon was involved.
Yeah. It goes back quite a while. And that's why, you know, we should be careful in our public policies not to be declaring war on things like that. Have we won the war on drugs?
No.
Okay. Have we won the war on terror?
No.
Okay. To my point. You know, we should be careful of that, because then let's arm the police and give them all this military equipment and all that. And it came in, you know, I mean, I was involved in some of that stuff. I mean, I've been in some really, really armored vehicles going up to some dangerous places, but But, you know, today you see it and police look like soldiers. They don't look like guardians. to
Greg,
me.
I mean, you look at at the number of vehicles that the city of Salem has. For some reason, I was driving by a city hall, and over on the right, there was a depot with, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 armored vehicles. It'd be interesting to know what sort of analysis went into what is our need and what's the benefit cost for these kinds of things.
Right.
I started my career as a professional, as a criminal justice planning coordinator when the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration was created. It was the first block grant program, and it turned out to be a failure. And as a planner, I tried to get a handle on on crime. And at that time, I don't know, hopefully it's changed, but at that time, all the information on crime rates was based on information reported to the FBI by local law enforcement, and I think 7 or 8 major crimes.
Yep.
The more I looked into it, the less I knew. If crime goes up, if the crime rate goes up, it may just be reporting is better. There's certain crimes in that list, like rape, that was chronically underreported.
Right.
And if people didn't have any confidence in the police, they wouldn't report crime. So essentially, if you were more effective at enforcement, you might get more reports. So you really couldn't tell. And at that point in Oregon, recidivism wasn't tracked by corrections at all.
Right. Right.
It was, there were lots of problems that I don't think they've been solved.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with the what we get told, because in 2020, I thought all of the gun violence with the more than 4 shootings was down, because I thought maybe during Trump's thing, maybe gun violence went down. But I just heard recently on the news that actually in 2020, gun violence is higher than 2019 or 18. So it's just, we didn't hear about it.
Right.
Right.
It's like, news stories get boring, and this is what I've heard a lot of people say, with what's going on with the trial and everything, the momentum and everything has to be maintained. It has to grow, because eventually the people will get bored with it. And so progress has to be made while there's still interest, but it does. Yeah. It really does. People get bored with even the most important issues of our time.
Another thing is, it's complicated. Those of us who are putting our energies into cause A, cause B, raising children, making a living, cause D or cause W. Well, okay. I have to admit, the statistics, the lies, damn lies, and statistics, the facts and figures around crime, the different ways that people analyze it, the oversimplification. If I'm not really paying attention, because there's other things in my life, well, then I'm not going to be very well informed. I'm not going to be as critical a news consumer in the area of crime as I am in some other area. I'm going to depend on journalists to know what they're talking about, whether they do or not, but I'm really going to depend on people who study the field, because I'm not studying the field. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, and there are so many fields.
Yeah, it's complicated. You're right, Carol. It can be a complicated subject. I also would say, though, that you shouldn't rely on, a lot of times when we feel it's that big, is that we rely on our media sources, but you got to be careful with that. We'll talk about that this spring, but look outside your window when you hear all these stories about violence and protests and riots and all this chaos going on. Make sure you're looking out your window every day and saying, do I see that here in my world?
Right.
If you do, then okay. But if you don't, is it nearby? Or, I mean, you know, just, you know, it's a kind of a good reality check, because the media will hype up and froth up because it sells advertising.
Well, Greg, there's
And
more to it too.
on the other, oh,
Oh, we
There-
had a collision.
that can work if you're, see, that's been my problem as a white person surrounded by whiteness almost my entire life. I'd look out my white window, I'd see all the white people, and I'd see the police protecting and serving. Not until, honestly, not on the news, but on TikTok, I started listening to people that were people of color, indigenous people, people that were sharing their stories, sharing their hearts for the first time. And then I started reading other books and opening my mind to what was going on right now. And when I look out my white window, I don't see any of that.
Mhm.
But I am now understanding and believing that my reality as a privileged person is very different than the reality that other people have. So I think, you know, looking out your window is good and bad at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Greg, I think another thing too, it's difficult today, media-wise. And let me tell you why. In Salem, this is the capital city, second largest city in the state of Oregon. If you want to take the local newspaper, the news is 2 days behind. That's just a fact of life. If you take the Oregonian, you can only get home delivery 3 days a week, I think it is. We get that too. Now, the problem is that, and let me tell you, underline that. There was a young student who at South Salem High School, who, and the story was in the Salem newspaper the other day. She's the editor of the student newspaper at South Salem. She was honored as the top high school journalist in the country. She wrote a story about the school board election.
Mhm.
And the school board, she was on the agenda so she could go along with another student at South who got student governor with the youth legislature. And they were both going to be honored at the school board meeting. And so the board chair told the superintendent to take her the honor off of the agenda for the school board meeting because she wrote something political and it shouldn't be discussed until after the election. Superintendent, under protest, she said, "I think this is wrong," removed it from the agenda. And so that was that. But you go a little deeper and you find that in July 20th of last year in the Oregonian, they wrote a story about this remarkable young future journalist. And one of the things they pointed out was that the newspaper that she was to be editor of had stopped publication in March of 2020. And so she decided she wanted to do something else since she was going to be editor. So she started covering the local demonstrations at the Capitol. It's a capital city, you know, I mean, we've got a few demonstrations going on. And so she did. Well, then come June 27th, this young lady who had her reporter's reporter's notebook and a pass from the high school newspaper and her Canon digital camera went to the demonstration at the Capitol. You know what? She was the only journalist there. And so that's what's going on in journalism. So you talk about like school board meetings. How well are they covered? They're not. And look at all of the other local things, county commission meetings. They're not covered that well. And then if you get into a big type news story, it'll be 2 days before it comes out. And so the TV stations, when we talk about like TV, we don't have any TV in Salem. We're just the capital city. And so you go to Portland then, well, Portland isn't going to cover every little detail that goes on in Salem or everything in between. And so that's what's going on. So no wonder there's stories like this you know nothing about.
Right.
And so this, by the way, this editor, high school editor, she started a online reporting for the news that she gathered. And then the next day she puts it on the pictures that she takes and written word about the story that she's taking. So she said she hadn't thought much about being a journalist in the beginning of her, when all this started. Now she's thinking, I might like to be a journalist. So that's what's going on.
Interesting. Thank you, Fred. Anything else on this topic?
I had one thing I wanted to mention. I'm not sure it's on the right topic, but it has to do about something I heard, and I'm not sure that it's appropriate, but I'm going to say it anyway. Somebody said, because the situation that we just had completed in this week in Minnesota occurred because we have a video of the event. If we didn't have the video, who knows what would have happened. But somebody said, when you see a vehicle stop with law enforcement and a black driver, stop and watch. Let them know that they are being watched. I don't know if that's something that's reasonable to do, but I think that it's important that we pay attention to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly can do that. The police are accountable to the community, and the community are the police, and the police are the community. That's the way it was originally outlined in the London Metropolitan Police Model. Janice, did you have a comment? You want to come off?
Yeah,
there?
I was just wondering about the police with their cameras. Are they really abiding by their directions of keeping those cameras on during every event? And are we, the public, are we able to see all those films, or are they edited so that we only see the glorified side of it?
Right. Thank you. They should be, certainly, if they have them. And those cameras are digital now, so that the actual storage of where the digital content is secure, and it's only supervisors can access that, and then they keep them for a certain period of time, and then they get rid of them unless they belong to a case that you want to hang on to it. But we would hope that they're always on. You hear these occasional cases where they turned off the cameras or turned off the, whatever. I think the bigger issue on that, though, is why in 2021, with everything we've known in the last 10 years, let's say, and looking at when body-worn cameras became available, why on earth has it taken this long to have body-worn cameras? And you see a lot of legislation, the police forum legislation, that's one of that you see often is to require body-worn cameras. And I know that's a fiscal expenditure, it's expensive, but so is a patrol car. And why is it taking this long? I mean, it just doesn't, that's a really good piece of accountability. It's probably related to the same reason why several years ago, back after, I believe it was the Ferguson case, that the FBI and the federal government, in response to the turmoil then, was that they required police, or they didn't require, they developed a federal database to collect information on police use of force. because there wasn't one. We really couldn't say at the time, how much do the police really use force and against who and what kind of force? We didn't really know. And so years ago, that was put into place. You know what the percentage is of police agencies in America that have abided by that have out of best practice? You know, the federal government can't mandate it. They can take your federal money away, but they can't really mandate it so much. But you say, this is what we want to do. Only 40% of 18,000 police organizations in this country have participated in that database. You know the best database on police use of force to answer those questions that you have access to? It's the Washington Post.
Hmm.
It's the Washington Post. Google that. Look at it. Amazing. Do black people or people of color suffer from police use of force more than whites? Well, not on raw numbers, because there's a lot more whites than there are people of color. But if you factor in the percentages,
Right.
they do indeed disproportionately have, you know, more aggressive action by our police. Where do I get that? Washington Post. I should be getting it from the FBI.
Right.
I can't, because it's only 40%, 4 out of 10 agencies. So that and you know, police agencies are again, that big ship, hard to move, culture, unions, that kind of thing. You know, as I recall back in the Ferguson era too, and a lot of people bashing the police, Blue Lives Matter, this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Gun violence and violent crime went up in big cities, kind of like what you're seeing now. Is it really going up, or did the police decide not to enforce certain things so the incidence of violent crime is increasing? That's just a question. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
But do large police agencies with some rogue cultures have the ability to just walk away and not, you know, or do a different tactic and crime rates increase?
Understand everything.
Maybe.
You know, I was thinking along the lines of what they just said about there hadn't been video. And I listened to the defense's witnesses, the one that talked about the use of force that trained, and then also the medical examiner they had. And those guys, you can just tell, maybe you don't, it was almost standard. I mean, he talked about use of force and one-upmanship, and that when you have a force against you, you're allowed to go one up.
Mhm.
Can't, and he kept talking like that. And then he goes and says, well, what do you think? He says, do you think it was use of excessive use of force? He goes, no, I do not. And that was that. And then the medical examiner, you know, carbon monoxide, the heart, the da-da-da, he's going on all these other things. He says, well, what would your diagnosis be? He said, I would have put down undetermined reason for death, cause of death, undetermined. So I'm thinking those two guys, if they're always the kind of people that the defense uses for the police, that you have no video, I mean, where do you go? And, you know, and you have a blue wall.
Right.
I mean, it was, but because the prosecution was so meticulous.
Yeah, they did an excellent
So
job.
meticulous.
And they had great technology. Jan.
Yeah, just a couple of random thoughts. One that stuck with me from of course, the murder of George Floyd was the look on Officer Chauvin's face, hands in pockets, as if to say, I'm above the law. It doesn't matter what I do, because there will be no consequences. And then at the trial, he was like a deer in the headlights. His eyes were darting back and forth in disbelief.
Yeah.
And to me, the message was, no, neither you nor any of your other fellow officers are above the law, and justice was served. I think that was one of the most profound truths that came through for me. And then I was wondering, didn't Seattle have a pattern and practice investigation a few years ago?
Yes.
Seems like they did. And yeah, that's when Carmen Best, I think, or maybe perhaps it was before she was there, but that, I think they've had some trouble complying with it, but they did have that. And then just a very minor little thing, in our little city of Des Moines, the police installed a red light camera on an intersection for the sole purpose of increasing their revenue. And people have just been up in arms about it because it was obvious there was no danger in this intersection. You would be hard pressed to get your speed up over 40 miles an hour to get through that intersection because of the way it was, the way it's configured. Anyway, just, just a few random thoughts. I really appreciate what everyone's saying, nodding my head, agreeing, lots of food for thought. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you.
You are correct. Seattle has a current and they're still working through it. And it was excessive force issues. And then Portland Police also has a current one, and they're fighting with the federal government right now about compliance with a few things, which just amazes me that, you couldn't resolve those things. But a consent decree is what happens after if they have a finding on that pattern and practice investigation. And the consent decree is a fancy term to say it's a settlement agreement. And so you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And it usually deals with training, hiring, use of force policies, that kind of thing that you need to fix. You need to document certain things. So one of the things in the new federal bill, the George Floyd bill at the federal level, has in there enhancements to the US DOJ's pattern and practice civil rights authority to subpoena and use a little more leverage on police agencies, which is probably a good thing. Caprice, thank you, and Carol for the information on watching from a distance recording that's in the chat box. Appreciate that.
I have one other thing that came up from on the news is compliance. Maybe you have something to say about that, because he said that a lot of these things, it's a big deal. They get into trouble because the routine traffic stop becomes like the one that got pulled over in Virginia, the military guy.
Yeah.
Okay. He gets pulled over. I don't understand why black people have to get out of the car. I started to get out of the car one time when I was pulled over. They told me to get back in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
so then he sat there, and the police, he even said, "I'm scared to get out of the car." And then he said, "Well, you ought to be scared." And then he said, "Get out of the car." And he said, "Well, I'm military." Well, then you should learn how to obey orders. I mean, it becomes almost more of a compliance issue than the traffic stop to begin with. And I think that guy, it was a retired policeman saying he's been fighting this for years, that they have this macho attitude. Well, in a sense, Chauvin did too. You're not complying. And it escalates and escalates, and it becomes more of an issue than the traffic stop to begin with. And I don't know if you've heard anything about that's a culture thing. I think, the person's got a badge and a gun, and he's going to prove that he's in charge, and you better do what he says. And
that's where the pattern and practice investigation is really timely for that agency. And I think that it's going to show that they've got, again, the apple metaphor, the cart is rotten in a lot of ways, meaning the culture tolerates that kind of misconduct, that kind of brazen cowboy warrior policing in high crime areas, regardless of, how it looks, because right in front of, children, and in the broad daylight, he did this, and he had such a brazen, like, no big deal attitude, picking rocks out of the tire, and just, he was killing this guy. And then the three that didn't do anything, say something. If you see something, say something. That's got to be in your policy. I mean, that's just expected, and so it's going to be interesting. It shows a lot. There's a lot of red flags based on what we saw there with.
I understood he was a lead officer at the time.
Yeah, he's been on for many, many years. He's 45, I think. He's getting close to retirement age for a police officer, and then he was a training officer. So the others are going to defer to him for sure. Culturally, you're going to be like, oh, I guess, and one of them tried to say, hey, let's roll him over. Shouldn't we roll him over? And they said, no. He said, no, we're going to leave him right where he's at. And so lots to look at on that for sure. Let me show you what is going on. You see that House, the state legislature slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. That's just in your state right now, my state, although I'm across the border now. what's going on right now in Oregon legislature, for example, on police reform. And they've passed some of this already, I guess, but a lot of different things there. First one's about a study by the Public Safety Standards and Training to study the changes in police training and provide results to this work group by the end of the year. Require police officers to be trained in airway circulatory anatomy, regulate the use of chemical incapacitants, impact conditions, modify police officer duty to report misconduct, right there. See something, say something. It's a sad day that we have to put that in statute, but I guess we do. Impose limitations on arbitrator decision, that's labor unions, on, you know, probably hiring back people that get fired and then they come back to work. We had a few really embarrassing cases like that where arbitrators said, nope, gotta hire him back. And they were involved in misconduct that you would not expect of a police officer, but they got hired back. Statewide database for the reports of physical force by peace officers and corrections officers. Put that in the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. Here's an interesting one I thought was interesting. I looked at the fine print. Require Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, that's the arm that trains and certifies your police officers, to investigate a person's character before accepting the person for training. So they can't get trained by the state and certified as a police officer or reserve officer. Requires that they investigate the person's character. If you look at the details of that, what it does, it says they have to actually use a form that questions the person as part of their background investigation on bias, on racism, on racist groups, membership to groups. And, you know, I think back in all the investigations I had on me in my career, from the beginning to the FBI ones in later years for security clearance, I was never asked about my racist views. I was asked if I belonged to any militia or groups that would try to overthrow the US. I was asked the general catch-all, is there anything about your background that would be embarrassing to the FBI or to the president or that kind of stuff? But nothing about racism. And then there also enhances the ability to look at their social media. So that's probably a good bill. Because, you know, with Chauvin, I think he went to college, and some of these other cases, wouldn't it be interesting for somebody to do an investigative reporting on who were they? What was his education? How was he hired? I mean, just those details. How do we get people like that in policing that could actually do what he did in such a brazen way? I don't know.
I understand there's a list of people in Salem, officers that are on a list by the district attorney that they aren't credible to be witnesses. The police officers aren't credible to be witnesses for any prosecution or anything. If they're on the list of that degree, aren't they also on a list of people that shouldn't be on the police force?
Yep. And you know why? This is what you're referring to is what we call Brady. It's a court case years ago, but do you have any Brady officers is what they're saying. And if you have Brady officers, they have to be treated differently. We had a couple in my agency, and one of those that I referred to earlier, that's what I'm talking about, is, and basically is if a person has ever been known to be dishonest during their course of their work, then they have Brady. And then you have a case, right? So that means somebody was dishonest in the course of their work as a police officer, and you can prove it, then you've got Brady. And under the Brady rules at the federal and state level, if in any criminal trial, if the defense is going to be, as part of discovery, they're going to ask the prosecution, do you have any of your witnesses that have Brady? And then they're going to say, you know, and there's a Brady file, the one you're talking about. And they're going to say, yeah, this officer here, he lied about, you know, whatever. And so then they can impeach him on the stand. They can say, you know, if he's got a critical, pivotal testimony, think about that in the Chauvin case. If one of them got up there and had Brady, you know, that's the whole point. You can't have people that are liars and dishonest on a witness stand in a trial like that. So, but to your point, why are they still police officers? Why? Labor unions, arbitration, rulings, labor law. You can't get rid of them. So, I mean, some you can, but not all.
And due process. There's due process.
And due process, yeah, and due process.
Can you tell me what 3059, is that You mean they authorize to command to disperse? I thought, who does that then if they don't do it?
Oh, I just went backwards. I don't know the details of that one.
Okay, because does that go with whatever's going on with Florida too? I mean, in terms of unlawful assembly. I mean, so law enforcement officers can't command people to disperse. Who? Okay.
They can command people to disperse now or declare a riot has been their practice, right? In crowd policing. So this bill, I assume, is doing some change to that authority to where they can't just claiming a riot.
I think the and arrest is the key.
Let me say, I wonder if it's similar. I was director of commerce once, and the state fire marshal was in our department. And whenever there was a determination made that there was a fire situation, the fire marshal contacted the governor's office, and immediately they addressed that question. So if it's a full-scale riot, it could be something along that line. And I'm not familiar with this bill either. There would be a way to do it.
Does it
not just a police officer.
Does it kind of wet your whistle though, Fred? Looking
Yeah.
at all these bills, make you a little excited? I knew when I put this slide, I thought, oh, he's going to get excited.
I want to read them.
Yeah.
Well, this is all in, I think it's already live.
Greg,
Yes. Carol.
I'm guessing that some of those bills will be passed and will become law. Some of them will die in committee, or some of them already have. I don't know. Will we be able, when we get the link to today's session, will we be able to go online and look up any of those House bills for more details?
Yes. And this is dated April 6th, so it's fairly recent. And so I will put the link in the show notes, and you'll be able, with the video. And so that way you can, we'll get that out so that you
Thank
can.
you.
They're all hot linked right here. I can't do it on my slide, but yeah, they're all there. And they're very interesting. And this is good progress. Some of this is, I don't know, but it's not bad. It's not bad.
Greg,
yes,
about 2513, the House bill interests me in light of the testimony by the pulmonologist
right
in the Floyd case. I mean, how many police believe that someone saying I can't breathe is proof that they can breathe? I mean, that seemed to be a factor in at least two of those police deaths, chokehold or knee on neck deaths, where the person was disbelieved because you could gain enough breath to mutter that, but the pulmonologist saying no, that's not proof of that at all.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And I just step back on a lot of this, and there's a political element to this, obviously, and we're looking at part of it with this slide, but is the police, here's the other problem with policing today, in my opinion, is that police have lost their footing relative to the role of, again, guardian. If somebody's in your custody, I don't care what they did. If they're in your custody and you're my agent and I pay, you're my police officer and you're arresting somebody, that person's in your care.
Right.
And you see police officers use deadly physical force, and then they just let the person die there. They don't even render aid.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, where did they forget that? I remember I was so proud of some troopers that shot a guy who tried to shoot them. He shot one of our troopers, nailed him like 3 times, but on I-5, but his ballistics vest stopped the bullets, but it disoriented him at the time because you're getting wham, wham. But the others returned fire, and he ended up, actually, you couldn't really tell, but he spun around and he killed himself as he was in the street. But anyway, those troopers immediately ran over and started CPR and tried to save his life.
Yeah.
That's because custody is in your care. And you heard that in the trial. If they're in your custody, they're in your care. With Mr. Floyd, they should have, he said he can't breathe. You got it. And I even think that when you're putting him in the car and he's big, and how would you like to be handcuffed? I did this with my students this week. How would you like to be handcuffed behind your back Put your hands behind your back right now and just feel it. And then you're to be kind of large and you're going to be put into a small cage.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? And when you're complaining about it, and he's saying, I'm claustrophobic, man, and I'm big, and, and they just, why couldn't you have, in the Guardian model, he's totally under control. There's no rush here.
Right.
Daylight. Let's put him back. Let's let him sit. Let's let him have a moment. Get your breath, man. We got to transport you. So let's figure it out. And they offered to sit with him and open the window, roll out, and air conditioning, but couldn't they have done that a little different?
Yeah.
And just said, here's how you do it. And I'll show you, and sit down. Now I want you to swing your legs, and I know and they didn't have the cuffs locked, and he was complaining about that. And, what is wrong with policing today where they have lost their footing on being a guardian? We have lost our way. So it's interesting. This one here requires the name tags, because riot gear don't usually have names. And as I think about the Portland riots, and I'm sure a lot of you saw the one where the kid had the speakers above his head. He's white, and a federal officer shot him with a projectile in the forehead.
Yeah. Major
damage. He's still, I think, suffering from that. Absolutely, from what I could tell, not an appropriate use of force. I mean, it makes me want to know who that officer is. And again, the story, let's investigate. Who is that? What was his training? How did he think that was right? What if that was his child? Would he appreciate me doing that to his child?
What about the feds in Portland that were unidentified with no markings on cars or uniforms or everything else?
And they wouldn't be subject to that law anyway.
No, they were the same group. So it's like,
yeah.
I know we were kind of in a little different era there, a political era. Yeah. Janice.
Yes, I'm wondering how much all of this is going to affect recruiting new people into the police force. You look at some of these standards but I love the fact that they're going to start screening people. Wouldn't it have been nice to have all those officers that did the insurrection? How many of those people were police officers and public servants, and here they were doing the insurrection? So,
right.
It's out there. And the other thing, and I know it started before I got here with Martin talking about the presiding bishop, but the thing that touched me, and it all touched me, but the thing that touched me was that until he heard the verdict, he could not have hope. Yeah. And when my presiding bishop, who believes in the living Lord, is afraid to say he has hope in our government, it just slammed me this morning. I mean, it just hit me so hard to think that every Black person in the United States, until they heard the verdict, could not believe that our courts could come against a white police officer.
I'm with you, Janice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it just,
Thank you, Janice.
And make sure you share that link with everybody, because our presiding bishop, when he talked about the fact that he had to have the talk, he had to be told, as a Black man, you have to be very careful when you're stopped in the traffic. I mean, it's just, it's so much that we're learning, and it's so hard to fathom.
Thanks, Janice. That's wonderful. I can't wait to watch that later tonight. And that's why Fred and I thought, I think we're going to have to divert and just, add this into our discussion topic focus for tonight, because I think we need to kind of process through it. I mean, there's a lot of good news there, but there's a lot of work to be done. But I think it's starting. The ship is definitely moving off compass into a different direction, and I think that's good. I just want people to keep at it, though.
Yeah.
Greg, I just want to real quick. I posted something on Facebook exactly that. Like, this verdict is not the end of it. It has to be the beginning of work. Absolutely. Go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just one of the things Janice was referring to, that the presiding bishop referred to all the things that he was taught and in turn taught his children to stay safe. You know, never talk back, you know, keep your hands free, this kind of stuff. And you can never, ever win. What he needed to do to stay safe as a black man in our culture, cut him off from hope, cut him off from belief.
Right, right.
And you know, and that
Interesting.
it's what a price that is to pay just to be safe as you negotiate
Right.
Well,
our
the
culture.
camera thing isn't quite it. It's Rodney King was on camera, and they had a trial, and everybody saw it, but they got off. And Breonna Taylor, she was shot, and they just let her bleed out. Why didn't they try to at least stop her bleeding?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Greg said, they were warriors, not guardians.
Yeah, and there's a formal model that we're talking about. We use those names, and the 21st Century Task Force on Policing that was created by President Obama has that clearly in there. They've got some good recommendations in that, and that went mostly unimplemented. And again, I just don't understand it, you know. But I get it, because the culture says, if you know, and police are really good at this. They're good at hunkering down. They're good at taking fire, you know, fire, and we just got to hunker down and we'll get through this. You know, people just don't understand this. They don't understand how difficult it is to be a police officer, how dangerous it is, and all the stuff we got to do. And so we just hunker down and we'll be okay, you know. And meanwhile, they pass up the grant opportunity to get body-worn cameras. We're not going to do that. The union will have a fit, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And but that's starting to change. I think it's starting to change, but it's got to grab the reins now and keep moving it forward.
Yeah.
And helping politicians, also policymakers, sort through what is real change and what is just political feel good, because some of that's there, and it's like, well, don't waste your time on that. You know, we do need to be able to, I think, you know, Derek Chauvin knew a couple things. I got a union. I'm a veteran. I breathe this culture. I've got qualified immunity. You know, people got my back. This is a you know, crappy neighborhood. You know, I don't live in this part, you know. I mean, so he had a lot of things that's, you know, qualified immunity is that's on the list, and we should seriously look at that. That's, you know, you could sue a police officer if they violated someone's rights. Right now, they could say, I've got, you know, but you can't really touch me. But if you can start getting into their pension, like that officer, that federal officer that shot that kid with a projectile for whatever reason, I don't know. Somebody needs to get into his pension.
Yeah.
He needs to realize that, you know, that's, you know, I mean, think about it. And I think Carol had said about getting people into policing, there is no better time than today to start a career in policing if you're a good person.
Yeah.
Educated, you want to serve humanity, you want to be a guardian of the peace, and be part of this new model, this new change, sign up. But you got to, you know, it's hard to tell right now because our enrollments are down where I'm at. So it's like, you know, I don't know if that's, I mean, it's across the spectrum, all majors, not just criminal justice. So we'll see. I'm sure it's affecting some, but I like what somebody said earlier, those that are in the rank right now, that if you feel uncomfortable with this verdict, there's the door. You know, and I talked to an officer a week or two ago about this case, and they didn't think it was murder.
Right.
I'm just like, what? And he's out there serving right now.
It's who you listen to. People on Fox News are told over and over again that this wasn't murder.
Yeah.
by
some people.
Yeah, I hear you.
Bobby, what did you want to say?
That's Bobby.
Well, I was, oh gosh, I get so involved in the present that I forget what I was going to say. Because I wanted to get back to what Jen said at the very beginning, because she was talking about being on Facebook and having someone who has the thought, if you're for this, you're against me.
Mhm.
That kind of concept. And one, because it doesn't rile us up, we don't have news that celebrates those wonderful, dedicated police officers who are presently being protectors. And I think we have to figure out what we can do also about that, because one, they say we don't know what they go through. They're right. I don't know their life. I don't know what they go through. I don't know what they've seen and what they have to take home to their house. In their psyche, and what they have to do inside to be able to keep doing the job, because they see a very different side. I have a friend who was, who said in Salem downtown at night, you wouldn't even recognize it compared to, what we go down to Salem and that kind of thing. And so we don't know, and we need to celebrate that, but we also need to figure out how to, everything that we tell them, we say, you're here to protect. And then we say, we need more money. So we want you to go out and harass every person that's going 10 miles over the speed limit. Or we need money. So we need you to do this and this. And I think we're sending mixed messages too, because of money and how we prioritize things that need to be done. So yes, I believe Black people when they say they are harassed by the police. I believe that. I also believe we are not giving police the best priorities. We say we want you to be a protector, but then we have them go out and do things that are not protecting because we want the money.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bobby.
Bobby Bowman got the last word tonight. Fred, you can bring us home.
Thank you, Greg. I want to say that he doesn't know I'm going to say this, but Greg has been my friend for 20 years and his reputation is absolutely sterling. And he's one of those police officers that we hear about when you all know one. And he's my friend, and he's your friend, and his heart's in the right place. And you know what? After 20 years, before you all came on tonight, I, for the first time, saw his badge. And so I feel privileged. But anyway, good job, Greg. Good discussion, everybody. We're gonna hit the books heavy next week, and we're gonna be talking about government and democracy and our best days behind us. And we're going to be going into that in some detail. So have a great week. And we are relying on, as we go along, this is not one that's assigned, but our common freedom. And it's been very helpful. This book, not this book, but the movement is about 150 years old. And it's filled with all kinds of contemporary pictures and people who are today, but the movement started a long time ago. And Greg and Laurie and I are finding that it's very, very helpful in our discussion. So we'll see you all next week at the old address.
Greg, when are you at the Rotary?
Next Friday, a week from tomorrow.
Oh, then you're not in the Dallas, Oregon. You're in Dallas, Texas then.
No, it's Dallas, Oregon.
But the Rotary meets on Tuesday.
No, it's the 29th. 29th.
I think you're going to Texas and you don't know it yet.
I just know
Because
it's the
they-
day after my second COVID vaccine, and I hope that I'm chipper.
But if
Okay,
you're-
you,
I'll figure it out, but yeah, it's supposed to be there.
Thank you.
we'll
Okay,
post
thank
it.
you
You all
very
have a good
much.
week. Blessings to you. Bye-bye.
Blessings.
Blessings, bye.